Hello, this is manic.mercurian with a celebrity or famous person birth chart reading. Uh, I asked recently for suggestions on famous people to read the charts of, and you all left me a lot of really good suggestions. This wasn't one of them, but I promise I will get back to your suggestions and do at least some of them. But yeah, I thought I would do, I don't know, I was just trying to think of like a chart that would be really interesting, and I think this chart looks interesting. And plus, the controversial topics, unfortunately, are what draw the most attention. So that's what I'll go with. But yeah, before we begin, I did want to mention if you at any point in time become interested in getting a personal reading from me, I'd be honored to read your chart. I'm only charging $55 US currency right now, and that gets you an hour of me talking in a pre recorded video. So I can cover a lot of information in that hour. But that's for birth chart readings. I also have other readings as well. Check out my website for information on that. I really appreciate it. It's what supports the channel. It's what allows me to make videos like this. So thank you. But anyway, so yes, and I also want to mention I'm gonna approach this pretty much the same as I would, anybody's birth chart reading. I will do my best to keep this a little bit abbreviated if I can. I would like this to be less than an hour long, but we'll see how that goes since I can I can talk a lot, so we'll see what happens. Okay, so Vladimir Putin. And by the way, okay, last disclaimer before we actually begin. So, I mean, I have some idea of this person. I might have some kind of opinions, but as always, I do my best to just talk about what's in the chart as I see it. I've read so many charts that it's what's the word, like, it's almost like muscle memory to me. So I at least feel like I can tackle these things without too much bias, but we'll see how I do. So, okay, so he has Libra, Sun, Gemini, Moon. I guess I should say that this chart is for Tuesday, October 7th, 1952 at 9:30 a.m. in St. Petersburg, Russia. So this means he has Libra Sun, Gemini Moon with Scorpio rising. Just kind of looking around the chart, I noticed a couple patterns. So his chart is really heavy with air and water. That's one thing that I noticed. And these are kind of the least dense elements. They're the last elements. Air has to do with thoughts. Water has to do with feelings. So this would suggest that he may be like very abstract. He has a lot of thoughts. He has a lot of feelings. He's very much like in his mind. He has a lot of like intellectual energy. That's one thing I noticed. The other thing I noticed is this dude looks like he can keep a secret. And, with Gemini Moon, you wouldn't typically think of that. That wouldn't usually suggest that, really. But then when you consider Libra Sun, 12th house Mercury, along with Neptune and Saturn as well. I use equal houses, by the way. But there's a bunch of 12th house planets. Sun in Libra, Pluto conjunct the midheaven, Venus in Scorpio, and Ascendant in Scorpio. All of these to me suggest someone who knows kind of when to hold their tongue, so to speak, which kind of makes sense because I know he has like a KGB background, right? So it makes sense that this person would know like how to be secretive, how to be private when it's necessary, how to be diplomatic. And I know that might sound crazy, in modern times, but that's just what I see with this person. And I do think, well, how do I put this? I have to be careful with how I phrase these things. With Gemini Moon, he's constantly thinking. And when you combine that with the Scorpio and Libra placements, he's thinking a lot. He has a lot of intellectual energy, a lot of analytical energy. He's constantly taking in new information and like strategizing. I feel like he'd be an excellent strategist. What's interesting to me is that with Libra Sun and Gemini Moon, that would typically be kind of an awkward energy. Air energy is awkward. So this chart strikes me as the chart of a person who might actually be a little bit shy, awkward, introverted. Like with air signs, it really depends. Like air signs need to be around people to be comfortable with people. It takes them time to open up and to be comfortable with people. If they spend a lot of time alone, they get really socially awkward and they get social anxiety and things like that. So, a lot of these things are what I'm thinking of with him because really he has even more air energy than water. There is a lot of water with, Ascendant and Venus in particular in Scorpio, but especially air, Libra and Gemini. So yeah, and what's interesting about Libra and Gemini is that these are actually very unstructured signs. They're kind of flimsy. They're all over the place. They're over here. They're over there. However, I think he holds it together though because Scorpio rising, and he also has Saturn conjunct the Sun, so that indicates that he'd be a very stoic personality, like very controlled. Part of him would want to be, I don't know, intellectually nimble and very conversational and maybe even experimental at times, but at the same time, I feel like all of that is like very tightly controlled for him, at least generally. Speaking of, actually, there's a couple directions I want to go. One direction I want to go is he has a lot of detriment energy. Let me kind of just look around really quick. I believe Pluto's exalted in Leo. You won't hear that anywhere else. That's just my personal theory. But other than that, and Saturn is exalted in Libra, and it's conjunct the Sun. So Saturn's actually very strong, very influential. But other than that, Sun is in fall and Venus is in detriment. And those are two personal placements. Those are two major players. So that's a big deal to have two of those debilitated. Also, it's weird. Venus is in a really weird place here because Venus is in the first house. I actually just read the chart of someone else who has Venus in the first house. Usually when Venus is in the first house, someone comes across very pleasant and very, attractive. They may be physically attractive or, at the very least, their aura is pleasant to be around. They come across as non-threatening. That's how it typically is with Venus in the first house. And that will still be true for him on some level, but it's coming from a weird direction here because with Venus is debilitated. Venus is in detriment. So with detriment placements, it makes a person quirky, kind of out of the box, more of an individual thinker, but also kind of counterculture or rebellious. Like there's something weird or different or unique about the energy. So again, to put it all together, it's like he does have an almost pleasant aura, but at the same time, there's so much like Pluto and Scorpio that he's coming across like simultaneously mysterious or powerful too. So I think that would be an asset. He could use that to his advantage. He could come across like almost pleasant at times. It's weird. It's like I wouldn't describe this chart as the chart of someone who's charismatic. I would describe it as like there's almost a charisma there, but not. Does that make sense? Like Sun is in Libra, which would typically be very charismatic, and it's ruled by Venus, which is in the first house. That would typically be, very charismatic, very attractive. And again, it's not that's not true. It's just estranged with Saturn conjunct Sun, Venus in detriment in Scorpio. He is pleasant and very diplomatic, but in a way that is unique, counterculture, different, cold. There's so much like Pluto and Saturn energy. It's heavy. He has like a very heavy yet empty energy. Does that make any sense at all? But that's what I see here. It's really interesting. And also, combining Scorpio rising, Scorpio Venus with Pluto conjunct the midheaven, that means he comes across very much like a Scorpio. And I think in some ways that would actually be different than how he would be on a more personal level. On a more personal level, I think you would see the air energy. I think you'd see someone who is like an excellent conversationalist, someone who loves, talking about ideas and concepts. That's how he would be personally. But if you don't know him from the outside, he would appear more like Scorpio. He would appear intense, powerful, mysterious, very polarizing as well. That's definitely no surprise with Pluto conjunct midheaven and Lilith in the 10th house and ascendant in Scorpio polarizing. You're either going to love him or you're going to hate him. That's very true here. And again, that's interesting because we really don't usually see that with a Libra person, with a Sun and Libra person and Moon and Gemini. That's the weird mix here. That's the weird combination. Like part of him comes across very, cold, calculated, intense. But then at the same time, he's Libra Sun, Gemini Moon. Libra Sun, Gemini Moon would characterize someone who really wants to fit in or, what's the word? They want to, oh damn it, what's the word? Like when you fit in or you change yourself to be a part of the group, conform. Libra Sun, Gemini Moon with Libra Mercury. That would suggest someone who really wants to conform and just kind of go along with things and be a part of the group. I almost think maybe that's why he would be so successful being in the KGB, because from what I heard, like that structure really rewarded someone who could kind of just keep their mouth shut and follow orders. So I think he would actually be oriented toward that on some level. Like he would just kind of, like, deep down his personality is malleable. He wants to just kind of follow orders and conform and do as he's told. But yet at the same time, he comes across like menacing, intense, powerful, polarizing, etc. So do you see what I'm saying? There's this weird mix of someone who truly just kind of goes along, and I almost think he'd be a good student because of that like conforming intellectual nature, all of that air energy. I think he'd be great at like just sitting in class and learning and like being told you have to take this test and do this paper. I think he could do that. I think a chart like this could thrive with that. But again, it's very interesting how now he's the leader of this country. Like, that's very different than what we'd expect from someone who would be obedient, because at the same, he has this other side of himself which is intense. And we'll talk in the career section, career/reputation section. But with midheaven and Leo conjunct Pluto, that means he comes across like a leader, like being on top, which again, it's just very different than I think how he is on a more personal level. Let's kind of just go around. I did kind of a scattered coverage of most of his chart, most of his personal placements anyway. I did want to mention Mars, though, since I haven't yet. Mars is in the second house, which indicates someone who's very independent. Mars is also in Sagittarius, which is interesting because on the one hand, Mars is at home in the fire sign, so that would show someone who can be very passionate, someone who has a lot of ambition, goals, drive, energy, etc. But at the same time, Mars is a little weird in the mutable signs. With Mars and Sagittarius, it's fire, but it's mutable. So that means that he is very passionate about goals and whatever he wants, etc. But at the same time, his passions are constantly changing. Does that make sense? Like, he is very passionate. He has that fire under him. But then the nature of his drive and goals are constantly changing. So I could see him like having the energy necessary like to accomplish his goals, but then he may lack direction sometimes, maybe. I don't know. That's just kind of a speculation, but that's my take on Sagittarius Mars. I did say this would be an abbreviated version, so I'm debating going ahead. But yeah, I just wanted to say one more time, with Venus and Ascendant in Scorpio, he has this like almost charming way about him, but it's cold, it's intense, it's like internalized. It's different, it's weird. Okay, let's talk about his karma. We'll talk about his past life themes. I'll talk about his upbringing as much as I can, and his like. I would usually at this part of the reading, I would usually talk about someone's potential, like what are their challenges in life, where are they coming from past life energies, and then where are they going from here? Where's their potential? Okay, so as always, the South Node is very relevant here. His South Node is pretty interesting. His South Node is at 20 degrees Leo. It's conjunct midheaven, and to a lesser extent, it's conjunct Pluto as well. If you use a wide orb, you could even say the South Node is conjunct Lilith and say that there's 4 placements. They're all conjunct at the top of the chart. But at any rate, with South Node in Leo and conjunct the midheaven and conjunct Pluto, that's actually a big deal. That would really suggest to me that he was a major player in a past life. He may have been a historical figure, a celebrity. He was hot shit. Like wherever he was, whatever he was doing, I don't know exactly what it was, but he was doing something major. With South Node in Leo, conjunct midheaven and Pluto. This is going to sound weird, but that really suggests to me that he was maybe someone with power, like a ruler, emperor, CEO. Could be a different gender too, queen, king. I don't know, or at the very least, he'd be like in charge of his town or, something. I have no idea, but it's something where he was the center of attention and he was in like the limelight all the time. Because we're combining Leo with midheaven, so very public role, and Leo, which is all about, being the center of attention. So yeah, in a past life or maybe multiple past lives, he was a leader. So that sounds very, familiar to what we have today. And really, I mean, that's not a surprise. I think most people do kind of echo, sometimes to a greater or lesser extent, depending on the person, but we all echo themes from our past lives. I have seen charts where they go in a dramatically different direction in this life than they did in previous lives, but for him, it looks like it's not his first rodeo on a soul level. Like, this role of being like a powerful leader in this life doesn't seem foreign to him. What else could I say? Yeah, I mean, it's very straightforward. Like, he wasn't like manipulating things behind the scenes. No. Like, in a past life, he was very much directly in charge. Like, everyone knew he was in charge. Everyone knew who he was. He was top down, in control. I can't see whether he was like benevolent or malevolent. I really can't see that at all. With South Node conjunct Pluto, though, I would suggest that he was like feared, or he may have been a polarizing figure in a past life as well. People loved him, people hated him, people feared him. Maybe he came across intense and mysterious in past lives, and with Pluto conjunct midheaven in this life, I would suggest that that is largely true here as well. South Node, it's really weird with South Node conjunct Pluto and midheaven for this chart. It's almost like what you see with his career and reputation in this life, that is pretty much exactly how his past lives were, at least on a thematic level. His personality, like his more personal side, may be different in this life, but at least like his career and reputation are very similar in this life. So anyway, so what I've noticed with a lot of charts of famous figures is that, it's not uncommon for them to have some kind of placement like this, because this literally suggests that he, in a past life, was a famous person, was well known, was powerful, was a leader. And so coming into this life, that's his comfort zone. He's done this before. He is familiar with it on some level. That's why he'd be kind of naturally drawn to this kind of role. What's less familiar to him is like home life. It's great that you can be the center of attention. Everyone's looking at you. Everyone knows about you. Like, you're on the news or whatever, and you're in the government or whatever it was in the past life. Like, that's one thing. But can you actually have like, a one-on-one relationship with someone close to you, with like a lover or a family member? Can you actually go home and like, nurture your own home life? Usually it's one or the other. I mean, if you see any like major celebrity or major inventor or something, or politician who, usually that's to the detriment of the home life, if that makes sense. And we can see that in the astrology. South Node is at the top of the chart, North Node's at the bottom. So with North Node conjunct the IC in Aquarius, that would suggest, it's great that, clearly he has some kind of leadership capability and potential. I think that should be, I mean, even if whether you love him or hate him, that's really not what this is about. I think we could all at least agree that he's a powerful leader, if we're sitting around talking about him. What's my point? So my point is, with North Node in Aquarius conjunct the IC, that would suggest like, okay, it's great that you can be a leader and be a center of attention and do all that, but can you also incorporate, maybe influencing the world, but in a more behind the scenes kind of manner? That would be North Node in Aquarius. Like, can you go home and maintain your home life as well? Maybe that's a part of it. North Node in Aquarius to me would suggest, rather than leading in such a direct fashion, maybe you could still do that on some level, but also incorporate, like I said, leading from behind the scenes, and maybe he even does that already. But North Node Aquarius to me would suggest someone who's like an inventor, an author, maybe a doctor, depending on the type of doctor. Inventor, author, someone who's working like in a lab or a garage or something. Like, they can still change the world, but they are behind the scenes, like a scientist. That's a good one. I'm not saying he literally like needs to do those things. I'm just saying, on a thematic level, I think that's what his soul is here to learn to do, if that makes sense. North Node in Aquarius would also suggest like still being very strong-willed, because the South Node in Leo suggests he was very intense, very passionate in a past life, and to a large extent he still may be. But with North Node in Aquarius, it's suggesting, okay, that's great, but can you also incorporate, being detached when it's appropriate? However, with all of his air placements, it looks like he already has kind of figured that out. Like he does have some kind of passion, especially we can talk about his childhood. So as a child, I think he was an interesting. I keep saying a weird kid. I kind of hate the word weird. It's so vague. I should stop using that. But with South Node in Leo and IC in Aquarius, this to me would suggest that he was. And I really don't know anything about his childhood, by the way, but that suggests to me he was like the center of attention. He was, even at a young age, he would have already been, getting a lot of attention, maybe positive and negative. Like he may have been made fun of a lot, but he may have also gotten a lot of positive attention too. I could see him being very strong-willed as a child, very intense. Honestly, maybe even more. Well, no, I guess he'd be slightly kind of fiery and intense either way. I was going to say maybe he'd be more fiery, intense as a child, and I think that might be true. The thing is, where it gets tricky is that he comes across fiery and intense on a public level, like with his career and reputation. But again, I think deep down he's not like that as much. With all the air energy, that would suggest someone easygoing and kind of chill, if that makes sense. But anyway, as a child, I see in Aquarius. I see in Aquarius is like the prodigy placement. A child that was an outcast, didn't fit in with everyone else, but had superior intelligence or abilities. That's great to have that intelligence or special abilities, but it doesn't make you the cool kid. Oftentimes that person would be picked on or ostracized because they're not understood. Okay, but we're combining that with South Node and Leo, which that suggests a child who got tons of attention, and that can be great, but it's not always great. That can actually be very isolating because everyone, if you're like a public figure, or even as a child, if he was getting tons of attention, it's almost like, everyone knows you, but no one is truly close to you. No one like truly knows you. Does that make sense? And it can also be very what's the word? I was gonna say alienating, or can make you feel naked and exposed to get so much attention all the time. You might not want, all of your life being on display, but that would be his experience as a child. So I think even very young, he would learn how to handle attention and how to deal with that, if that makes sense. But yeah, combining South Node in Leo. Oh, one other thing too. South Node in Leo conjunct Pluto. That really does suggest as a child he got tons of attention, for better or for worse, and he may have been very intense, very passionate. He may have had very intense moods. Like I said, I think those would actually kind of fade away as he got older, but a lot of intelligence, a lot of attention. I think judging from that, I would think that as a child he would be like very dysfunctional, but also very accomplished in certain ways. Does that make sense? Like he'd be, I don't know. I think I explained that as well as I can. With Sun in Libra, Moon, and Gemini, that would actually suggest that his parents got along. I don't know if that's really true or not, but whoever was raising him, it looks like there was consistency. There was harmony in his surroundings to some extent, and so that's actually what allows him to have the confidence that he does today. What else could we talk about? Saturn is exalted and conjunct the Sun. It is kind of bordering the 12th house. I use equal houses. Oh, this is Placidus, though. So depending on the house system, his Saturn and Sun are either in 12th or 11th house. So anyway, I was trying to see if his father was very present. So having Saturn direct and exalted and conjunct the Sun, that would indicate a very present father, like the fatherly kind of masculine, traditional or structured energy, authoritative energy. That would be very strong in his childhood. So someone, he had some kind of father figure that was very, very strong influence for him. But what's interesting is that with Saturn and Sun either in the 12th house or at least close to it, that would suggest that his father like was there. Some kind of father figure was very present, very involved. But at the same time, he may have been like absent, maybe mentally absent. There may have been like drugs or mental illness. Um, and I almost want to say if he had Sun in 12th house, which he may or may not, we can debate on where the house cusps are. But if he does have Sun in 12th house, that to me would suggest that he has psychic abilities which he inherited from his father's side of the family. So a lot going on with his father's side of the family. It's kind of interesting. The mother, I don't think would have been as involved. Moon symbolizes the mother. It's in the 8th house, which doesn't really form a major aspect with the ascendant or the first house. And also, a moon is close to the descendant, which also suggests a mother that, maybe didn't understand him, didn't have like a connection with him, if that makes sense. So again, I don't know if this is all true. You can go fact check me if you'd like. I would actually love for someone to do that. But yeah, if I had to guess, I would say very present, involved father figure. Mother, not nearly as involved. And that kind of makes sense because, Venus is also a feminine energy and it's in detriment. So it's like the feminine energy is really lacking for his chart. He has a lot of air, which is, air can be cold. It's kind of just expressionless. So it's like kind of lacking the warmth or the emotion, I think. Anyway, so we talked about karma. Oh, let's talk about his karma and his, potential some more. Usually I'll talk about Saturn. Saturn conjunct the sun is a difficult one, especially with the sun is in fall. My personal opinion is that Libra sun is the hardest sun sign to have. I'll link the hardest sun signs video. But yeah, having Saturn conjunct the sun to me suggests that at a young age he was someone who was extremely hard on himself. He may have like suppressed his identity a lot, like his whole ego, his self-expression. He, for some reason, he felt like he had to completely suppress it. If I had to guess, I would say it's because of that fatherly figure that was super involved. He was so involved that like I think Putin was very disciplined very heavily. There was super authoritative, top down, like very straightforward, very hyper structured energy for him, I think. And really, I think that's kind of just how his whole life would be. That's how he was raised, and that's kind of just the energy that he would always have. So yeah, that is very challenging, but it would lead to success for him later in life. That's how Saturn energy operates. Saturn is in Libra, which would suggest at an early age having challenges with other people, challenges with relationships. There may have been challenges with his own like parents' relationship, which I know is weird because I said that they got along really well, but at the same time there may have been some kind of challenges or delays or endings with that as well. So yeah, that would be very hard on him, and especially at a young age, it would just be difficult for him to have one-on-one like relationships with people. I think again, going back to what I was saying earlier, it would be much more comfortable with him just to be known like on a public level. Like that's familiar to him. It's harder for him to actually have like intimate relationships. I think he can be very conversational, can talk to people, and he can have like a powerful reputation. But when it comes to just like, I can't imagine someone with a chart like this going on a date. That's just not. That would be completely uncomfortable for him, I would think, anyway. But yeah, that would be especially true at a young age. Young age would be even harder. It may have been harder for him to socialize as well, harder for him to speak, to express himself. I think he would be, like I said earlier, this really looks like the chart of someone who he may have been very introverted, very quiet, very shy even. I know that sounds weird. But again, like I said, I think as he would mature, especially after age 30, he would learn to be more expressive, and that's where he would actually become really authoritative. And that's where you see the other side of Saturn as well. Kind of cold. I was going to say callous. I don't even really know what callous means. cold, authoritative. He would come across, especially later in life, he would come across like he knows what he's talking about. He'd come across experienced, and he'd probably have excellent foresight, which I think I said earlier. But I mean, combining Gemini Moon with Libra Sun conjunct Saturn and Libra Mercury, that all suggests like excellent foresight, strategic planning, especially socially. Like constantly thinking about, okay, what do I need to do to be on good terms with everyone or to succeed, in my community or in my place. The reason why he's so good at that is because he lacked that as a child. And I'm just speaking based on his Saturn placements. Like as a child, he may have not really had good people skills. He may have not known how to talk to people. All of that was learned later in life. Okay, but yeah, let's move forward. Let's talk about the career and reputation. So it is an interesting one. We've talked about this little dynamic before in this reading, but Lilith, Pluto, Midheaven, and South Node all clustered together. On the one hand, this is very unusual. On the other hand, when you pull up a very public figure like this, it's not unusual to see some kind of rare like configuration around their midheaven, or at least in the top of the chart, because it's synonymous. Having having a bunch of wild stuff happening around your midheaven, that indicates you're going to have a very unique or powerful or special reputation / career. So that's true here. We kind of talked about this a little bit, but with midheaven in Leo, it's such a different energy than most of the rest of his chart, other than maybe, well, there are a couple placements that are similar. I guess what I'm saying is like, most of his chart seems very, honestly, kind of low energy and like secretive, private, conforming. But then he's got this Leo midheaven, which says, when it comes to the public level and career, like I stand out, like I come across positive, powerful, I come across like I know what I'm talking about. And then again, with Pluto conjunct midheaven as well, I come across mysterious, I'm polarizing. There's all that going on, but again, the personality like beneath that is just is totally different. Libra Sun Gemini Moon is typically very conforming. It'll be a very nice person. Like his midheaven doesn't look like a nice person. It looks intense, and you love him or you hate him. So again, it's just really interesting how all that kind of fits together. Obviously I know what career this person has, but yeah, I mean, you could clearly see that with South Node conjunct the midheaven. I think I said this already, but his career and his public life are his comfort zone. Like he just gets it. He always has, like on some level, he always got some kind of attention. So that's just where he feels comfortable. He has experience with that. He's used to that. He's probably good at that, on some level. So really, with placements like that, another thing too is with Lilith and Pluto both in the 10th house, that those are both very dark placements. So it's weird. You have a mix of midheaven and Leo. That would typically be someone who comes across really cheerful and warm and enthusiastic with their career and reputation, and maybe that's true on some level. But we're also combining Pluto and Lilith in the 10th house, someone whose career or reputation is very dark, intense, wild at times, but also very controlled, powerful. What else? Dark. I said dark, but that's a huge keyword. So yeah, really, I mean, it almost couldn't be more perfect for what we know him to be. It literally looks like someone who would be, in charge of a country, and who would do so in a way that's controversial and dark or intense, or maybe controlling. I mean, that's literally what his midheaven looks like. But if I didn't know that, let me think of some political occupations I could see him doing. Something intense for sure. Something where he's getting a lot of attention. Yeah, he's got the limelight. He's a leader in some capacity. And something involving intensity, something involving high pressure. That's what I see him doing for his career. So if it wasn't politics, I would almost think like maybe a forensic investigator or something like that. But that doesn't really involve the level of power and attention of fame that I would really think of. So what else would it? some kind of leader. I know this is gonna sound weird, but with Pluto conjunct midheaven in Leo, I would almost go the direction of maybe this person could be like a performer. However, when you add in all this air energy is awkward. It's more kind of gangly. It's more intellectual. So I mean, but I almost want to say he could be artistic. I don't think he is, but I'm just going off of his chart. Um, Definitely something where you're getting all the attention, you're famous, and I don't know. I think it could actually be advantageous how polarizing he is. That's what gets you attention is being polarizing, not just being everyone's best friend. But again, he has that kind of advantage of being able to do both, being able to conform and just follow the crowd and be a sheep when it's appropriate or useful, and also knowing how and when to stand out and be, like a powerful leader when it's necessary or useful as well. So really interesting mix. But yeah, if he wasn't like a dark, like tyrant, warlord, leader, if it wasn't that, I don't know what else would be something with intensity and something with leadership as well. I mean, yeah. It's hard because it's honestly reading the charts of people that I know, even like him, like I know of him, I know a little bit about him. It actually makes it more difficult because I'm trying to think of what would I say if I didn't know anything about this person. Definitely a leader. That much is very clear with his midheaven. Um, hmm. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. That's really the bottom line. Okay, lastly, let's talk about his compatibility. I think this will be fun to do. We'll talk about his compatibility, his attraction. What does he need in a relationship? How do I see kind of the ideal romantic relationship playing out for him? And we'll go through all the signs. Usually I go by element, but sometimes by mode, depending on the chart. For most of this, I look at Venus, Mars, and the descendant. Those three placements, more than any others, really give you the best idea of what someone finds attractive, what they need romantically in a relationship, what they need in a partner, and how they express themselves romantically and sexually as well. Um, with Where should we start? This one's a little bit difficult because, well, I shouldn't say difficult. This one's complicated because Venus, Mars, and the descendant are all in completely different elements. So this to me suggests it's a little bit complicated. He needs someone whose astrology is a little bit mixed. Like he's attracted to fire, but also water and earth. Like he wants kind of a mix of everything. What's interesting is it's a mix of all three elements that he mostly isn't, if that makes sense. Like he has a lot of air energy himself. But I think he would actually be the kind of person that's attracted to someone who is different than he is. Some people want someone who's very similar to themselves. Some people want someone very different than themselves. I would speculate based on his chart that he wants someone like he's very aloof, cool, calm, like detached. Yeah, he can have his intense moments, but generally speaking, I would think that he, especially in a romantic relationship, I would think he'd be kind of easygoing. However, with Scorpio rising, this is how this works. So rising represents what you are. The opposite of that is how you see other people and what you expect from others, what you need from relationships and partnerships, etc. So with Scorpio rising, he would be the one that is more intense or secretive or kind of out there and complicated or deep maybe or complex. He'd be attracted to someone who's a little bit more simple, someone like Taurus, someone who's just grounding. And honestly, I think that would be really great because he really lacks earth energy. He has no earth planets whatsoever other than Jupiter, which is retrograde in the 7th house. He does have descendant in Taurus, which is ruled by a benefic, and Jupiter's in the 7th house. So that suggests like good fortune or abundance with relationships. But yeah, especially with he needs someone earthy. Oftentimes, also when we lack a certain element, we are attracted to it because it's exotic. It's someone different than ourselves. So with him, he has so much he has so much air and water. He he can speak the language of thoughts and emotions. Like there's a lot of thoughts going on, a lot of emotions going on. I think he'd be very much in his head. And he, I think, would be very ungrounded. It's not that he doesn't have foresight, because he does. He can be strategic. He can have foresight. He can think things through logically. He can be very analytical. He's got all that down. But I still would say that he's not grounded, because it's just, I think he may have like too much intellectual energy, too much mental energy sometimes. I think he could be an overthinker. I think he could be paranoid sometimes. I think it'd be difficult for him to just chill like an earth sign. He does have heavy energy, but at the same time he's kind of all over the place. At least I think internally he's all over the place. I think he has this outer shell, like this heavy weight pressing down around him, but inside he's actually very light and breezy and constantly moving around. Does that make sense? So I'm almost picturing like a ghost inside of a robot. That sounds so weird, but that's honestly, I think that's a good analogy. He's the ghost, so he's loose, he's over here, he's over there, but he's trapped inside this like metal, steel robot exoskeleton or exterior suit, I guess. That's how I see him. So yeah, it's this combination of very light energy but also very heavy energy. But being around someone with earth in their chart, I think, would just be so refreshing to him. He really lacks that like just grounded, practical, chill energy, because earth signs are very practical, but not in the sense where they have to like constantly think everything through, other than maybe Virgo kind of does that. But Taurus and Capricorn in particular are just they actually come from a place of instinct. Their logic and practicality is instinctual. So they are actually very just chill, straightforward, direct. So on some level, that's what he's seeking. Someone who is maybe kind of traditional or kind of vanilla, I guess you could say. Someone who has their shit together. Someone very stable, very consistent. That's what he's really looking for the most, I think. I always say descendant. If I had to go with one placement for compatibility, I would say it's the descendant. And with descendant in Taurus, he needs that earthy energy, that fixed earth energy. Taurus does line up kind of strangely with most of the rest of his chart, because he has so many air placements. It's funny because yes, he does have like descendant is in a nice sign, Jupiter is in the 7th house. Those would indicate good fortune with relationships, and I would still think that's true. But at the same time, his compatibility is complicated. Like, he needs someone who's much different than himself, much more stable, much more practical, and I don't know, grounding. But he also needs someone passionate as well. With Venus in Scorpio, that would suggest that he obsesses. Like, when he has feelings for someone, he obsesses over them. And this is actually kind of out of character for him, because honestly, I guess he does have Scorpio rising, so he comes across like a water sign. But really, other than that, there aren't any water planets other than, Venus and Uranus. So it's out of character. Like, typically he would be a very logical person, very analytical, very detached, not very emotional, not comfortable really expressing emotion. But in relationships, when he has feelings for someone, that would open this like very intensely emotional side of him, where he would obsess over someone with Venus and Scorpio. And Venus is, again, it's debilitated in Scorpio, so that would suggest that not everyone is going to be receptive to the way that he expresses himself romantically. Not everyone's going to be receptive to the level of intensity that he has romantically. So that's where it's interesting. He needs kind of a mix. Usually where Venus is, that shows that you're attracted to that sign. So with Ascendant in Scorpio and Venus in Scorpio, I would really think that he'd be attracted to someone who, maybe someone else who also has Scorpio rising, or maybe someone who has other major Scorpio placements, because someone who has those Scorpio placements will be receptive to that kind of intensity and infatuation. It looks like he's really looking for someone stable. That's one of the commonalities between Descendant in Taurus and Venus in Scorpio. Yes, they are in opposing signs, but the commonality is He's looking for consistency. He's looking for stability. Okay. It's just that he needs a combination of someone who's very grounding, like Taurus, or maybe Capricorn, but someone who's also emotionally deep and emotionally receptive, like Scorpio too. Okay, so yeah, it looks like he wants someone with heavier energy, water and earth primarily. He does have Mars in Sagittarius, which brings a whole nother element to the mix. But I always say I do think out of these three compatibility placements, descendant, Venus, and Mars, I do think Mars is the least important. Mars more has to do with sexuality. So yes, that is an important part of romance and compatibility, but I don't think as much as Venus or the descendant. Because Venus is more about like the romance and attraction. Mars is primarily sexual in this context. But it's worth mentioning. With Mars and Sagittarius, that would, to me, would indicate a very healthy sexual appetite. And what else? It would indicate being attracted to someone who's a little bit adventurous, outgoing, enthusiastic, knowledgeable. Someone like Sagittarius. So at this point, let's just go through all the elements really briefly, and then we'll wrap this up. So first, the earth signs. I already pretty much covered those. I think that's the biggest thing. I think that's what would be best for him. I think that would kind of complete his chart in a way. He's got basically everything else. He's mostly lacking earth more than anything else. So I could see it being mutually complementary. He would add more intellectual and detached, but also like intense and passionate energy. Like he's got all these other elemental energies that he could add to an earthy person, and then an earthy person would of course be very grounding for him, which is I think would be key. I think that would be a really great influence for him. I'm mostly leaning toward Taurus and Capricorn. Virgo could work. I think he would actually have more in common with Virgo than he would Taurus or Capricorn. But again, I don't think that's what he wants, though. Venus, Mars, and the descendant are all in animalistic signs. Scorpio, Sagittarius, and Taurus. I guess technically Sagittarius is half animal, half human. But again, it's the least important. But anyway, let's focus on Venus and the descendant. They're both an animalistic sign. So a more human sign, or in other words, a more intellectual sign, like an air sign or Virgo, I don't think he's going to be as attracted to. I think it'd be more of a friendship, if anything. Also, he is a Libra. He does have a Libra stellium. I haven't even mentioned that. 4 planets in Libra. But typically, Libras want someone who's more outgoing than themselves, or more strong-willed. So again, even Taurus and Capricorn would be more strong-willed than Virgo. Virgo's more adaptable and flexible, it's intellectual. I really just don't think it matches up with what he needs romantically. I think Virgo would be more of a friendship type energy for him. I think he could have great conversations with Virgo, maybe be friends or like partners on certain things. But yeah, romantically, Taurus and Capricorn is definitely what I think of. I think Capricorn's very goal oriented and ambitious, and so I think that could be interesting for him. Taurus or Capricorn. And let's talk about the air signs real quick. Get those out of the way. Air signs he's going to relate to a lot. He has more air than anything else in his chart. So like Gemini in particular, he's got his moon there. So other people with major Gemini placements, he's going to have a deep connection with. But again, unless there's something else going on in the chart for the other person, I really think, air energy on its own is going to be more of a friendship. Honestly, out of all the elements, I am least likely to pair air with other air signs anyway, because air signs are so flexible and intellectual. They usually are like looking for something to hold on to. They're looking for an element of more substance, so to speak. Not that air signs don't have substance. Like, they are very intellectual and, they're intellectually deep. But they're so conforming that, two air signs together can be awkward. There's so much mental energy. It's not usually very romantic. So yeah, air energy, he's got that down. He's already detached and intellectual. I don't see him vibing with someone else that is also that way. I think it'd be like two negative magnets. He could be maybe friends with that person, and really that's true for any of the air signs. Libra and Gemini, that's just going to be what he already is. It's friendship dynamic. Aquarius would be slightly different. His North Node is there, so Aquarius will help him to evolve. Aquarius will be constantly pushing him in this or that kind of way. And Aquarius is a little bit more strong-willed, so he may be a little more attracted to Aquarius. Like, Aquarius does have that stability that he's looking for. It's just that Aquarius is still too similar to him. It's detached and intellectual. Aquarius can come across grounding because they're somewhat stable, but then deep down they're still a detached kind of air sign. They can still be unpredictable. So I don't know. I'm not in love with any of the air signs for him, that's for sure. Next is water signs. That one's a little weird because water signs are so emotional. I mean, in romance and attraction, he can be emotional and passionate because of his, Venus. He also comes across like a water sign because of his ascendant. But at the end of the day, he's also very detached with all of his air placements. So this is one of those things where it's more complicated than just looking at things by sign. I think he would want someone with some kind of water in their chart. But if I was just looking at the signs themselves, I wouldn't pair him with a water sign. If I had to just pick one or two signs, I'd pick Taurus and Capricorn. But yeah, picking one sign, I wouldn't match him. Like, Scorpio will be receptive to the way he expresses himself romantically, but it's also there's gonna be a disconnect between any of the water signs and how he is on a regular basis. So that his is complicated. I have to say it like it is, and it's complicated. Pisces, I think, would be awkward because, again, he has Libra placements. He's looking for someone more strong-willed. He's looking for someone stable, someone consistent. Pisces is none of those things. Like, I think Pisces would be probably the worst match for him because Pisces simultaneously doesn't have much in common with him and isn't what he's looking for either. So it's like, it just really doesn't make sense at all. Cancer is going to be very unpredictable because that's where his Uranus is. So if anything, I could see some Scorpio being in his, lover's chart or, wife's chart or whatever. But there's got to be something else going on. There's got to be some earth or, another element there as well. Okay, lastly, that leaves fire. And again, he really doesn't have that much fire going on either. There is Pluto in Leo. There's Mars in Sagittarius, which we talked about. I see fire signs being friends for him. There could be a sexual dynamic there since he has, Lilith is also a sexual placement and it's in Leo, and then Mars is in Sagittarius. So especially if he comes across someone who has major placements around 27 degrees Leo or around 26. Oh, I just noticed they're trining. Didn't notice. Okay, so in that case, if he does come across, let's just say if he comes across anyone who has major placements toward the end of any of the fire signs, then there could be a really sexual, passionate dynamic there. But in general, for everything else, fire sign related, I would see them being more friends. Does that make sense? So it could be sexual, but it could also be generally more of a friendship. Because, air signs love fire energy. They love someone more strong-willed than themselves. So I think that would be really engaging for him and entertaining maybe, or interesting. He might admire their confidence and their enthusiasm. But again, he's looking for someone very stable, someone like Taurus or Scorpio. That's very different than the fire signs. Fire signs are not stable at all. They're unpredictable. They're dramatic. I don't think that's what he's looking for, really. So I could see him being attracted to a fire sign, but I think it would be difficult to make it work in the long run, particularly with Sagittarius or Aries because they're less stable. Leo out of the three is going to be more stable, than any of them. But even Leo is very fiery, very dramatic. Yeah. So I know that was a mouthful. His compatibility is complicated, but I can simplify it. I could simplify it down to three signs that I like for him: Taurus, Capricorn, and Scorpio. He needs those heavy, stable, consistent signs. That's what he is lacking, and that's what he's attracted to. Okay, so I hope you enjoyed this reading, especially those of you that stayed for the whole thing. Thank you so much for watching. But yeah, let me know your thoughts about all that, and let me know if you want a reading as well. Okay, have a great day. Thanks for watching.